What's going on? It's Chris at Line Punch Forge. So, I had thought about doing a stamp making video for a very long time, and I started to think about how I was going to produce it, what I was going to talk about, maybe do like a series of, how to make a moon, how to make a star and a flower and a leaf in your own stamps. And then I got to thinking, do I really want to put heat treating and how to work with steel and tool steel in the same video, or do I want to make it separate? Because it's kind of like its own topic. So I decided to do it separately. And because it's such an important part of making a stamp that has some longevity to it, I decided to make it its own video and do that first. So we're going to be talking about first kind of like a recycled tool steel, and when we're talking about that, we're talking about old files, we're talking about other stamps like like the cold chisels and that kind of stuff, and basically everything that you're going to be dealing with when it comes to used tool steel, whether it's a nail set or whatever. The subject is going to be very much the same and similar. So this is not going to be an in-depth metallurgical discussion about what exactly happens. It's going to be a very down-to-earth basics on how to take something hard like this, a file, make it soft, work with it, and then make it hard again. So there's a process that's involved in that that's a little bit different than working with precious metals or base metals like copper and brass and all that. So we're going to go over that. First thing we're going to talk about is taking something that is hard, like an old file, and making it soft again. So join me as we go through this metallurgical, let's call it a adventure. Yeah, that's it. We'll go ahead and start that off. But before I do, if you haven't already checked out linepunchforge.com, please do. I'm going to be having stamps listed there. I currently have cabochons, all of my cool tools, and all that kind of fun stuff. Check those out, and we'll talk to you soon. So let's get on with this fun little example tutorial adventure thing that we're doing and get on it. Alright, we are at my workbench. So, probably familiar with one of these. It's a file, and it cuts metal and wood and plastic and all that. So if I take a hard file and take another hard file and I try and file on a file, I'm going to have a pretty particular noise, and that noise is going to be this. What that tells me is that this file and this file are probably similar hardnesses because they're not biting into each other, they're skating off. Same thing with this one. But if I take a file that's been annealed and normalized, like this guy, a little cut off, and I do the same thing, my noise changes. And I'm biting into that material. Let's zoom in here. So that material's got some file marks on it because it's soft. So now what I'm going to be doing is taking one of these files, not this one, but one of these, and I'm going to make it soft, and I'm able to work with it. So we have a hardened file in the vise. I'm going to go ahead and give it a push. And now I have a broken file. If you look at the grain structure of that break right in here, let me see if I can zoom in. It's super, super fine. And that means that the little metal molecules in there have collapsed down to a nice, fine, hard grain. The problem is with being really fine and hard like this, it also makes it brittle. So we have a piece of broken file there, and we're going to break off another piece. So just like before, break. So super hard, but very brittle. We don't want that when we're working with our own tools. So what we're going to do is anneal this. or normalize it. Alright, so we have a broken piece of that file you just saw me crack off. I'm going to go ahead and heat this up until it's nice red hot. I'm going to create a little fun cavity down in here for it to sit in. And that way I get a nice heat dispersion. This isn't necessary, but heck, it's fun. I should say that little cavity is not necessary. The heating it up until it's red hot and then letting it cool off slowly, that part is. So, make sure we're in focus. Now the reason I'm covering it up is because I want that steel to cool down super slow. This is just a pumice pan and it's not going to really cool down super fast. You can also use a bucket of ash, you can use vermiculite, heat it up, nice even temperature. You saw the color of the metal didn't have any black spots in there. That means that everything was nice and evenly heated. And now I'm just gonna sit that there and I'm going to wait for it to cool down by itself. I want that to cool down nice and slow, and what that's going to do for the steel is normalize that grain structure. That super fine grain structure that we saw break when it came to the file and the vise. Oh, that was one of my good files. Oh well, we'll make a good tool out of it. What's going to happen is that grain structure is going to relax and it's going to become microscopically larger, if that makes sense. But that relaxation of the grain is going to cause that steel to then become soft. That soft steel then can be worked with a file or a jeweler saw or something like that. So that's what we want. Now if you buy tool steel from like a metal supermarket, like onlinemetals.com, I love them by the way, you can buy O1, the O stands for oil hardening steel, O1 tool steel already annealed and ready to work, and all you need to do is harden it. The only reason you would need to go through the process I'm showing right now is if you're using old tools like a file or a punch or something like that to then make your own tool. So this step is not necessary if you buy brand new annealed tool steel, and it's relatively inexpensive. I can put some links up for that. But we're going to go ahead and let this cool down, and it'll be a little while. So I'll see you guys then. Alright, welcome back. I just dug our little piece of the annealed or normalized file out of the pumice, and I'll put it next to my original. Kind of lost a little bit in the crack, but you can see it fits in. So what I'm going to do is first take my file over the original piece that we didn't heat up. So I want you to pay close attention to the sound and the way it behaves. Hear that skating? Both of these are about the same hardness. So take this out now, and we'll replace it with our annealed piece, our normalized piece, and we're going to do the same thing. You can see that I've actually filed down a portion of that now. So what we've accomplished is we've taken that hard piece of tool steel, the hard file, and we've created a now soft piece of steel that we can play with. So I'll take my jeweler saw. And I can cut into that just fine. And when it comes into stamp making, this is kind of where we'll go from that. But I want to talk about the heat treating first. So I'm able to saw into it, I'm able to file it, I can work it. And let's take the original file that we broke here and use the original file to file the little baby piece. And now our saw marks are gone. So this is now essentially ready to be worked to make another tool out of. But we're not going to do that part today. What we're going to do is now take this little baby piece and we're going to make it hard again. So let's get that all hooked up. Alright, I know what you're thinking. Why am I looking at that big black spot in there? Well, this is an ammo can that is full of peanut oil. I like using peanut oil for my quenching. So what I'm going to do is heat my metal up again to that red hot that we were before. Zoom, focus, there we go. I'm going to heat this up to that red hot what it was before. I'm going to pick it up and I'm going to quench it into that oil. And in doing so, I'm going to make this steel again hard, but then it's going to be brittle as well. So once it's hard and brittle, I'll show you how to take this and make it so that you can use it for something that you're going to strike. So it becomes hard, but it also becomes a little bit more flexible, and that process is called tempering. So we're going to go ahead and heat this up, quench it. Of course, fire extinguisher is right over there and right over here. I got two of them. And then second of all, you're going to want ventilation, because dipping this hot metal into oil is going to create some smoke. And then you also want to make sure that what you're dipping your quenching in isn't going to catch on fire. And if it does, oil fires are hard to put out, so that's why it's in an ammo can. I can close the lid, remove the oxygen, and now my fire's out. So there's some precaution there, and let's go ahead and heat this up. We'll go ahead and do the heating up off camera, and you'll see me quench it. So we'll go and do that. Alright, we are about to quenching temperature. My metal is non-magnetic. That's when it tells me that the metal's at about temperature. Once it gets to that point, I'll heat it up a little bit longer so it stays at that temperature, and then I'll quench it. So I'm going to go a little bit brighter orange here, and we're going to go ahead and quench it in just a second. Peanut oil. Smells like peanuts. It's probably still kind of hot, but we'll let it cool off a little bit, and then we'll give it another test with a file. Alright, so here's our steel. Just quenched. And I'm going to take let's take my big file, because I like, that one's aggressive. So here's my big file. I'm going to go ahead and skate it across. Listen to the noise. That steel is now hard. The problem is that this steel is now so hard that it will crack again. What we are going to want to do is we're going to sand up this finish a little bit. Try and make it so that we can see the shiny metal. And then we're going to heat it with a torch so that we see the temperature colors. It's going to go from a light straw to a blue to a purple, but what we want to do is make it so that this portion, the portion that we're going to use as our striking end, our tool end, is a nice straw color. That's going to make this back here probably a little softer, and then it differentially heat treats it up into the area that is straw. So straw is what we're trying to achieve. This one, since I couldn't break it off in the vise right away, I'm not, it's probably not necessary, but I want to make sure I talk about tempering your hardened steel, because that is an essential part of using making a usable tool. The other thing you can do, if you don't want to heat with a torch to create the temper, you can bake this little piece of steel in the oven at 400 degrees for maybe 2 hours, and then turn the oven off, let it cool down by itself, and that'll make this whole thing nice and usable and not so brittle. So let's go ahead and grind this up a little bit so you see the finish, and I'll show you the colors. Alright, for this I've ground off that surface so that you can kind of see the color happening. I'm holding it in some vice grips, and that way I don't have to worry about burning my fingers while I'm doing it. So once this portion up here gets to that straw color I was talking about, I'm going to immediately quench it in water. So it doesn't matter whether or not you quench oil hardening steel like this in water when you're doing tempering, but you do want to quench it in oil while you're doing your hardening. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take a little plumber's torch, and I'm going to start my heat down here relatively rough. This will start to turn purple, and you'll see the colors creep up to the end. Once the colors creep up to the end of the piece, I'm going to wait until that nice straw color gets to the tip, and then I'm going to dunk it in my water next to me here. So we'll go ahead and do that. Hit it with a little bit of heat, see if we can watch the color change. Since steel does transfer heat, I can hit it with heat and then wait for that color to hit. So I'm going to start to see some color change. Right here I have a straw color. What I want is that straw color to be down here. So I'm going to draw that heat this way by pushing it. So I have a straw color where I want it. It's now moving up right about there. It's starting to get a little darker up at the tip. I want it a little bit darker. Hit it with a little bit more heat, and then watch that color transfer. So I have a nice straw color now at the moving up on the tip. Be patient. It's not going to happen super quick. So right there, I want to quench it. And I should have locked that color into that metal, and that's what I'm looking for, is to lock those tempering colors in. So that's going to tell me that this portion, this purple portion, find my pointer, this purple portion, purple blue, is going to be softer than this portion here. Now I have some hardened color here, so if I was going to strike using with this tool, I would probably want to take my vice grips off and heat this up a little bit more till it turned more purple blue. Purple blue is going to be a little bit more soft, a little bit more malleable, and it's going to not shatter when you're hitting it with a hammer or another tool. But you see the color change, and then right here at the, try and get a good look at it for you, you go from purples to kind of yellows to a nice little straw color. And I'm going to go ahead and hit that with a file real quick. And I'm softer. I can definitely not skate. See, that part's digging in. I'm skating a little bit, but I'm at a relatively decent hardness for using as a stamp or something like that, even a graver. So this works exactly the same way for how you temper, harden, and quench steel. So that's essentially what you're going to want to do. You can get away from this differential heat treat process, like I said before, by sticking this in the oven for around about 2 hours at 400 degrees is about the right tempering process. So If you go a little bit higher, you'll get a little bit darker colors. If you go a little bit lower, you'll be a little bit harder. So that's a little science. All right, so now that we've gone over how to anneal / normalize steel, how to quench it, how to temper it, you now have the tools that you need in order to start making your own tools. Remember that the first portion of this video, where we annealed or normalized our tool steel, is primarily only necessary if you're using recycled tools like files or punches or nail sets or stuff like that. If you're buying tool steel like 01 tool steel, you don't need to go through that process because it already shows up annealed. That's the nice part about buying new steel. Now, buying new steel also gives you some advantages of knowing exactly what kind of steel it is. You buy 01 tool steel, you get 01 tool steel. You buy W1 tool steel, you know that you're getting W1 tool steel. Now, real quick on little bits and pieces of tool steel. W1, the W stands for water hardening. You can still harden that in oil. The O1, or O, stands for oil hardening. Then there's a whole herd of other steels like A series steels, which are air hardening. There's other types of ball bearing steel and all sorts of other fun stuff. Don't concern yourself with that. I like using O1 across the board. It's a great steel. It's forgiving for a garage heat treat, which is what this is. Also 10 series steels, 1095, 1085, 1075. Those are all great steels. Don't worry about those. Just use O1. O1 is fantastic. It works. It's easy to find. It's inexpensive. And I use it for almost all of my stamps. Sometimes I use old files, which tend to be a 10 series steel, like 1095, but I heat treat them almost exactly the same. So when it comes down to it, experiment. You're going to break something once in a while. You're going to break a punch or you know, you're going to crack something. You're going to heat treat it, quench it, go to skate your file off it to see if it's hard, and it's not going to be hard. You're going to need to probably quench it again. That's the problem with using recycled steels. Now, the brand new steel, the 01 tool steel that you can buy through like online metals, you're probably not going to have that happen. You're going to quench it in your oil, you're going to pull it out, let it cool off, you're going to skate your file across it and see if it's hard, and it's probably going to be hard. Recycled steel has its own herd of fun intricacies that I could go on about all day long. So, we're not going to do that. But now you have the tools that you need in order to basically heat treat steel for use in a metalsmith shop. So, this technique works for gravers, technique works for stamps, technique works for hammers, if you want to make your own hammer, much like, well, I don't have it sitting here, but I made my own hammers. It works on a larger scale. It's like some of the blacksmithing that I do. Heat treat the same way. You temper the same way. You draw the heat back. You draw the hardness out of the metal by tempering it. So when somebody has a good temper, means they're like, good, even teal. They got a good temper. When they got a bad temper, they're hard. They're easy to break. They're people and metal and steel. It's the same. If this guy has a bad temper, nobody wants to be around it. It's going to break. It's going to crack. If you've got a good temper, it'll last you a while. You want to be around it. You want to use this. You want to, yeah. So, that said, there's a lot of stuff going on in the world right now, especially in the metalsmith communities, and people jabbing their jaws about who should say what and who should say this. My advice to that is you be you. Don't be a jackwagon. And, yeah, do something nice for somebody. Instead of being mean, do something nice. Because we all make mistakes. We all learn. We're all beginners at one point in time. I like to think I'm going to be a beginner for the rest of my life. Because something new happens every day. I learn something, and something new and something wondrous should be happening to you every day as well. So be amazing. We'll talk to you soon, and yeah, have a good temper.